Right now, somewhere in your body, an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase is either active or suppressed. If you are moving, walking, standing, shifting your weight, it is active. It is pulling triglycerides out of your bloodstream and directing them toward your muscles to be burned as fuel. If you are sitting still, it is suppressed. The same triglycerides that would have gone to your muscles are now being redirected. They are going to your fat cells instead. And the trigger for this switch is not complicated. It is not hormonal imbalance, or metabolic disease, or genetic predisposition. It is simply the absence of muscular contraction in your legs. That is it. The moment you sit down and your large leg muscles go mechanically silent, lipoprotein lipase activity in those muscles drops by up to 90% within the first hour. You are not burning less fat because you are lazy or undisciplined. You are burning less fat because a molecular switch in your muscle tissue flipped the moment your legs stopped contracting. This is what happens to your body when you sit still, and it gets significantly worse with every hour that passes. Let's go through it. Hour 1. The metabolic switch flips. Within the first 60 minutes of uninterrupted sitting, the changes happening inside your body are already measurable at the cellular level. Lipoprotein lipase suppression in your leg muscles is the first domino, but it is not falling alone. As your legs go still, the electrical activity in your postural muscles, the deep spinal muscles, the glutes, the hip flexors, drops toward baseline. These muscles are not just movement muscles. They are metabolically active tissue that, when engaged even at low levels during standing and walking, contributes significantly to your daily energy expenditure through a mechanism called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT. The energy your body burns through all movement that is not structured exercise. For active people, NEAT accounts for the majority of daily caloric burn above resting metabolic rate. For people who sit for most of the day, NEAT is nearly eliminated. The difference in daily energy expenditure between a sedentary person and a moderately active one is not primarily the gym session. It is the accumulated effect of muscles that are either quietly contracting throughout the day or sitting completely silent. By the end of hour 1, your insulin sensitivity has already begun declining. Your muscles have a specialized pathway for absorbing glucose from your bloodstream that operates independently of insulin. The GUT4 transporter system, activated by muscle contraction. When your muscles are contracting, GUT4 transporters move to the cell surface and pull glucose directly out of circulation. No insulin required. When your muscles stop contracting, this pathway closes. Glucose that would have been absorbed directly by your muscles now has to wait for insulin to manage it, increasing the insulin burden on your pancreas and beginning the slow erosion of metabolic sensitivity that over months and years of chronic sitting becomes insulin resistance. That is hour 1. Hour 2. Your circulation starts losing the battle. Blood does not move through your body on its own. Your heart pumps it outward. But the return journey from your extremities back to your heart depends heavily on the rhythmic contraction and relaxation of your skeletal muscles, especially in your legs. This is called the skeletal muscle pump. When you walk, your calf muscles compress the deep veins with every step, pushing blood upward against gravity. When you sit completely still for 2 hours, this pump stops. Blood begins pooling in the deep veins of your lower legs. The pressure in your venous system rises. The walls of your capillaries come under sustained stress, forcing fluid out of circulation and into surrounding tissue. This is why your ankles swell during long flights and extended desk sessions. It is not a minor cosmetic issue. It is your lymphatic and venous system losing the battle against gravity without muscular assistance. Simultaneously, the endothelial cells lining your blood vessels, the same cells responsible for producing nitric oxide, regulating inflammation, and preventing the oxidized LDL adhesion that begins atherosclerotic plaque, are responding to reduced blood flow velocity. Healthy endothelial function requires shear stress, the mechanical force of blood moving across the vessel wall. When you sit still, blood flow slows. Shear stress drops. Endothelial nitric oxide synthase activity decreases. The production of nitric oxide, the molecule that keeps your arteries relaxed, prevents platelet adhesion, and suppresses the inflammatory signaling that initiates plaque formation, begins to fall. Research on sedentary behavior shows measurable reductions in endothelial function after just 2 hours of uninterrupted sitting. Your arteries are literally becoming less healthy in real time while you work at your desk. Hour 3, your spine begins its slow structural failure. The human spine was not designed to hold a static position for 3 hours. It was designed for movement, the constant subtle shifting, loading and unloading, flexion and extension that occurs during walking and varied posture. When you sit in a fixed position for 3 hours, something specific happens to the intervertebral discs, the cartilaginous shock absorbers between each vertebra. These discs have no blood supply. They receive nutrients and eliminate waste products entirely through a process called imbibition, the mechanical pumping that occurs when the disc is loaded and unloaded during movement. Compression squeezes fluid and metabolic waste out of the disc. Decompression draws fresh nutrient-rich fluid back in. When you sit still for 3 continuous hours, imbibition stops. The discs in your lumbar spine are under sustained asymmetric compression from your seated posture. Nutrients stop flowing in. Waste products stop flowing out. The nucleus pulposus, the gel-like center of each disc, begins dehydrating slightly. The surrounding ligaments, held in a lengthened position by your seated posture, begin losing their resting tension. The deep stabilizing muscles of your spine, chronically shortened on one side and chronically lengthened on the other, begin adapting to the position by changing their baseline tension. None of this is catastrophic in 3 hours, but repeat it 5 days a week for years, and you have described the exact mechanism by which the majority of chronic lower back pain develops. Not from injury, from position, from the slow structural adaptation of a spine that spent more time in one static posture than it ever spent in the dynamic movement it was built for. Hour 4. Your brain starts running on fumes. This is the effect most people notice consciously, but almost none correctly attributes to sitting. By hour 4 of continuous sitting, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, the protein responsible for neuron growth, synaptic strength, learning, and the maintenance of cognitive function, has declined measurably in your cerebral circulation. BDNF production is directly stimulated by physical movement through a mechanism involving the contraction of muscle tissue and the release of lactate, which crosses the blood-brain barrier and triggers BDNF synthesis in hippocampal neurons. When muscle contraction stops, this stimulus stops. Your brain does not immediately notice the shortfall, but over 4 hours, the cognitive effects become real and measurable. Attention narrows, working memory performance drops, the ability to shift flexibly between tasks, cognitive flexibility, degrades. The prefrontal cortex, which depends on adequate cerebral blood flow and neurotrophic support to maintain its executive functions, begins operating at reduced capacity. This is why the classic afternoon slump, that wave of cognitive fog, fatigue, and inability to concentrate that hits around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, is not primarily a blood sugar problem or a sleep debt problem for most people. It is a movement deprivation problem. 4 hours of sitting have reduced cerebral blood flow, cut off BDNF stimulation, and left the brain operating on declining neurotrophic support. Standing up and walking for 5 minutes restores cerebral blood flow, re-engages the skeletal muscle pump, and stimulates a measurable BDNF release that reverses the cognitive decline within minutes. The mental fog lifts, concentration returns, not because you rested, but because you finally moved. Hour 5 and beyond. The systemic inflammation program activates. When sedentary behavior extends past 5 continuous hours, as it does for the majority of office workers, drivers, and remote employees every single day, your body begins responding to the sustained inactivity through its stress response systems. Cortisol, which should be at its lowest point in the late afternoon, following its natural morning peak, can paradoxically remain elevated in people who are sedentary and stressed throughout the day. Elevated cortisol in the afternoon suppresses insulin sensitivity further, promotes visceral fat storage, and begins upregulating inflammatory cytokines. C-reactive protein levels rise. Interleukin 6 production increases. These are not abstract laboratory numbers. They are the same inflammatory markers that predict cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, cognitive decline, and all-cause mortality in the epidemiological literature. The link between prolonged sitting and premature death, which has now been established in studies covering millions of people across multiple decades, is not explained by the calories you did not burn. It is explained by the sustained, systemic, low-grade inflammatory state that chronic sedentary behavior creates at the hormonal and cellular level. Physical activity does not just burn energy. It actively suppresses this inflammatory program through myokine release, specifically interleukin 10 and IL-1 receptor antagonist, anti-inflammatory molecules produced by contracting muscle tissue that travel through the bloodstream and counter the pro-inflammatory signals generated by inactivity. Your muscles are not just movement machines. They are an endocrine organ. When they are silent, one of your body's most powerful anti-inflammatory systems goes offline. Here is what makes all of this genuinely actionable. The research on sedentary behavior reveals something counterintuitive and important. A single long exercise session does not undo the metabolic damage of 8 hours of sitting. Studies comparing people who exercised for 60 minutes daily but sat for the remaining 16 hours with people who did no structured exercise but moved consistently throughout the day found that the latter group had significantly better metabolic markers. Continuous low-level movement throughout the day is not a substitute for exercise, but it is not replaceable by exercise either. The two operate through different mechanisms, and both are required. The fix is not complicated. Set a timer for 30 minutes. Every 30 minutes, stand up and walk for 5 minutes. Research shows that breaking sitting with 5-minute walks every 30 minutes normalizes post-meal blood glucose, maintains endothelial function, restores BLUT4 transporter activity, keeps cerebral blood flow elevated, and prevents the inflammatory cascade that extended sitting triggers. 5 minutes. Every 30 minutes. The skeletal muscle pump re-engages. Lipoprotein lipase reactivates. BDNF synthesis resumes. Blood glucose clears. Your spine gets the imbibition cycle it needs. Your endothelium recovers its shear stress. Everything your body needs to function correctly starts working again, because the signal it requires to do all of those things was always the same. Movement, not performance, not intensity, just movement. Your body was designed to receive that signal continuously throughout the day. Give it what it was designed for, and it runs the way it was built to run. Stop giving it that signal for hours at a time, and it begins systematically failing in every system simultaneously, hour by hour, exactly as described above. Your chair is not neutral. It is a biological decision you are making every time you sit in it without getting up. Make that decision consciously. If this changed how you think about what sitting is actually doing to your body, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who sits for most of their day thinking that their evening workout is enough.